Today we're going to start in on Unit 3. I believe in the newer books it's going to be Chapter 19, and it's going to be on plant structure and nutrient support. All right, so there's going to be three basic types of tissue that are going to give rise to diverse plant characteristics. And some of these characteristics that we like to talk about are going to be what we consider that make plants superior to animals. And so there's going to be four reasons why plants are considered superior to animals. The first one is longevity. The longest living plants live 10 times longer than the longest living animals. For example, the bristlecone pine is said to believe that they think it's around 4,800 years old, whereas some of the oldest animals, like giant tortoises, only live to be about 200 years old. Height is going to be another one that plants are going to be way superior than animals. So as far as height, the tallest plants are going to be 20 times taller than the tallest animals. So we have the coastal redwoods, which are going to reach around 379 feet tall or 115 meters. And then we have the tallest animal, which is going to be a giraffe. It's only actually going to reach about 20 feet tall or 6 meters. Weight is going to be the third thing that's going to make plants superior. The heaviest plants are going to weigh almost 20 times as much as the heaviest animals. So we have the giant sequoias, which are going to be found mostly on the west coast. They're about 3,300 tons. The blue whale, for example, is going to be one of the heaviest animals, and it comes in at only 170 tons. And the last is your energy acquisition. So with energy, plants can make their own food by photosynthesis, and animals have to rely primarily on producers such as plants for energy. And so here we can look at some of these things. We see the bristlecone pine. We see the tallest trees there, the redwoods. We're going to find these on the west coast. And as far as weight, you see here the giant sequoia. And you see these lily pads here, which are photosynthesizing and making their own food. Now plants are going to have three distinct parts. With these distinct parts, you're going to find that we have roots, we have stems, and we have leaves. Now with the leaves, or roots, let's start with the roots. They're going to be essential to the plant growth and survival, and they're going to have three main functions. Their job is to absorb, so with absorption, the roots are going to take up water, minerals, and oxygen from the soil for use by the plant. They're going to help anchor the plant and keep it in place. And they help as storage, so they'll store sugar that's produced through photosynthesis and convert it into starch and water, and they're going to store it here in the main root, especially if you have like a bigger taproot. With these, you do have two different roots. The taproot, as I just said, is going to be characterized by a thick primary root with smaller roots that are branching out, and then you'll have the more fibrous roots, and we'll talk more about roots later on. But that's just some of the basics. And with the others, we'll go into more detail with roots, stems, and leaves, but we'll have the roots, stems, and leaves. So those are going to be your three main distinct parts. So like we said with the roots, they're going to serve important functions, including absorbing water, minerals, as well as some oxygen from the soil, and it will help to anchor it in place. With the shoots and stems, they're going to provide structural support for the leaves, and so the stems are going to have a vascular tissue, which is going to conduct the food, water, and minerals throughout the plant. With the shoots, you're going to have leaves. They're going to be the broadest portion of the plant. This is the chief site of photosynthesis in plants and becomes a plant's primary food factory. These leaves are also going to be vulnerable to water loss through evaporation. If you remember from Bio 101, we talked about the open holes to where plants, the water evaporated out, and that was going to be called the stomata, and it was surrounded by a guard cell on each side, which could open up or close depending on if the air was too dry or if it was very windy or hot. So flowering plants are going to be divided into two major groups. We refer to these usually as our monocots and dicots. In the lab, you might see it as eudicot. That's going to be the same thing as a dicot. So these names are going to be derived from the structure that they have called the cotyledon. So monocots and dicots are going to be plants in which one cotyledon forms and are going to be called monocots. So, of course, one and mono, meaning one. In these plants, we're going to have two cotyledons. They're going to be called dicots or eudicots. Plants are also going to be divided into these groups by different features, following things such as their seeds. We're going to look at leaves, stems, flowers, and how their roots are developed. So with the monocot, monocots are going to be about 70,000 species that we know of on Earth. The seed is going to have one cotyledon, like we said. That cotyledon is going to be the part of the plant embryo that's going to become the first embryonic leaf or leaves. The leaves are going to have parallel veins in them. Then you're going to have the stems. The stems will have vascular tissue that's going to be arranged randomly in scattered bundles. When we look at the flowers in just a minute, it's going to occur in multiples of 3. The roots will be fibrous, and we have the vascular bundles that you actually see here in this picture. Dicots, or eudicots as they're often called, are going to be under around 200,000 species that we have. The leaves are going to be branching veins within them, and so they look like they branch out throughout. The seeds are going to have 2 cotyledons in them. The stems are going to have vascular tissue that's arranged in an orderly ring, which we'll look at in a little bit. Their flower parts are going to occur in multiples of 4 and 5. And with their roots, they're going to have one main taproot, which you might see some small root hairs or smaller roots coming off, but you have a definite larger taproot. And so we're going to look at some examples of these. So here you see the monocot versus the eudicot or dicot. With the cotyledons, you see those are the embryonic leaves that are going to come out. And so with monocots, you have 1. Eudicots, you're going to have 2. As far as the leaves go, you see the parallel veins in the monocots and the branching veins or net-like veins, which are going to be found in the eudicots. With the stems, the vascular tissue is arranged randomly scattered. If it's a dicot or eudicot, that tissue is going to be arranged in an orderly ring, often referred to as like spokes. If it's a monocot, you're going to find parts in 3s as far as the flower part. If it's a dicot, they're going to be in 4s or 5s. And then looking at the root, you see the fibrous root of the monocot versus the main general tap root with the branching roots coming off in the eudicot. So some examples. With a monocot, we have things like palm trees, orchids, lilies, most of the grains used in food products, and all grasses. Also with these, we're going to have the dicots, and so most of the plants that we consider flowers are going to be dicots or eudicots, and things such as coffee, potatoes, fruits and vegetables, and most large trees, and also things like roses and daisies, strawberries, peaches, all the things like that. So plant cells and tissues are going to differ from animals' cells and tissues. There's going to be 3 main tissue types that we see in plants. You're going to have the dermal tissue, the vascular tissue, and the ground tissue. Now with that dermal tissue, it's going to cover and protect the surface of the plant. So it's going to be like the dermis on an animal, or the epidermis, so that's there for protection. You have the vascular tissue, which is going to transport water and nutrients throughout the plant. And when we're talking about these different plants, they are going to use different vascular tissue to transport water versus transporting nutrients. And for example, with an animal, they're just going to use the vascular system they have, which is going to be arteries and veins. So going into the dermal tissue is going to cover and protect the entire plant. This type of tissue is going to include the thin epidermis, a waxy cuticle, and specialized guard and cork cells. So with the dermal tissue, you have The epidermal cells, which are the ones you see first, they're a single layer of tightly packed, very thin cells. They produce a waxy substance called cuticle, which is going to help protect against water loss. Next, right beside it, you see the guard cells. These are the ones that I was talking about from Biology 101, where they would open and close in order to reduce water loss, but they also helped during photosynthesis to release the oxygen that was produced. And so these are going to be specialized epidermal cells. So they create that opening for gas exchange. The opening, remember, was called a stomata, and they're going to release the gases that they need during photosynthesis. They close these openings to reduce water loss by evaporation. The last one is going to be the cork cells. These are going to be the cells that replace the epidermal cells and provide thicker, more protective covering and even form outer layers of bark. Next, we go into our vascular tissue. It's going to be a system for getting nutrients to and removing waste products from all parts of the plant. And so sap is going to be moved in tissue called xylem and phloem. And so with this vascular tissue, this transport sap is going to be transported through the plant, and it's going to consist of things like water, minerals, sugars, and different nutrients. So you're going to have two parallel transport systems here. Now with the xylem, it's going to conduct water and dissolved minerals absorbed by the roots and tissues throughout the plant. Outer surface of tubes are going to be formed from dead cells that connect to one another. They help with plant and structural support. Now when you go into the phloem, this is going to conduct sugar that's produced by photosynthesis in the leaves, and it's going to move it throughout the tissues of the plant. The tubes are going to be formed from living cells that are going to be arranged end to end to form a sieve tube. Now these sieve tubes are going to be tubes that help deliver sugar to cells outside of the phloem. They do not offer plant structural support. And so that's the two differences. So xylem is going to use dead cells, helps with structural support. Phloem is going to use living cells and does not help with structural support. And so xylem also is going to transport water, and phloem is mainly going to transport the sugary substance that's created during photosynthesis, so the food. Next, we're going into ground tissue. The ground tissue is going to comprise most of the body of the plant, and it's going to have three types of cells: the parenchyma, the collenchyma, and the sclerenchyma, and they're going to be found in what we know as the ground tissue. So like we said, it fills the interior of the plant and makes up most of the plant's body. The parenchyma cells are going to make up the majority of plant tissue and includes most soft, flexible tissue in leaves, flowers, stems, roots, and fruits. It's going to be responsible for photosynthesis, food storage, production, and release of plant hormones. The collenchyma cells are going to be elongated, stringy cells with thickened cell walls. It's going to give plant flexibility and enable it to twist and bend. This type I like to think of as the type that you see in things like celery. Now with the sclerenchyma cells, these are going to be non-living cells with thick cell walls. The cell walls are going to contain something known as lignin. This is going to be the chief chemical component found in wood. Function and support by enabling plants to resist the force of gravity and grow tall. And it's going to also be fibrous cells used to make cloth, rope, and paper. Now we're going into where most plants have common structural features. Right. So roots are going to anchor the plants, and they're going to take up water and minerals. So with the roots, it's going to be essential to a plant to grow and survive. It's going to have three main functions, which we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. Absorption, where the roots take up water, minerals, and oxygen from the soil to use by the plant. It's going to help anchor the plant and make sure it stays in place. And it's actually going to be a sugar storage area. So the sugars produced by photosynthesis are going to get sent to the roots, and that's where they're going to be stored as a form of starch. Now looking at these types, we have two different types. We're going to have the thicker root, referred to as a taproot, and then we have the thinner, finer roots, which we call fibrous roots. The taproot is going to be characterized by that thicker primary root with smaller roots that branch from the stem. It's going to grow deep into the soil, and energetically, it's going to be more expensive to produce. It's going to be found primarily in eudicots. With the fibrous root, it's going to be characterized by small-sized roots, all branching out from the stem. You won't find one main large root. They'll all be about the same size, so no primary root. It's going to be found in upper, more shallow parts of the soil, and they're going to be able to spread outwards. Energetically, these are going to be less expensive to produce for the plant, and they're going to be found primarily in monocots. Now, looking into the root structure, it's going to consist of all three tissue types. Now, looking here, if you have the eudicot root, it's going to have vascular tissue, so you see the xylem and phloem, which are going to be a central column there surrounded by ground tissue, and the outer edge is going to be a dermal tissue. The xylem is going to be the center of the root with arms radiating outwards, and the phloem is going to be found around the xylem's arms. Now, if you look over to the right-hand side, you're going to see the monocot. It's going to have a central core of soft, spongy parenchyma tissue called the pith, and it's going to be surrounded by a ring of vascular tissue. Outer surface is going to be the epidermis on both, so you're going to have root hairs that come off of it. That's going to greatly increase the surface area of the root and give it way more contact with the soil. Virtually, it's going to perform all absorption that occurs in the roots. So looking here, we have spaces that we're going to find that exist between the roots. And so with these spaces, it's going to allow for gas exchange. So we'll have things such as oxygen that's able to come in, and things such as nitrogen and phosphorus that can come in. So here we see the mangroves that are growing in a waterlogged soil in a habitat in which little air can get into those roots. So as a consequence, they're going to protrude. These long roots are going to be numerous, and they're going to have lots of pores that remain above the water so they can make their gas exchange. Right. Stems are going to be the backbone of the plant, and so they're going to provide structural support and house the circulatory system of the plant. And so one of the main components of the shoot system is going to be the stem. It's going to help with things such as leaf positioning. So it positions leaves where they can interact with sunlight and carry out photosynthesis. It's going to have a structural support. So it provides support necessary to keep plants upright, and distribution. So it's going to house the plant's vascular tissue throughout, in which water, minerals, and sugar are going to be distributed around the plant. Now looking here, you see the stem structure can be more complex here. We see that there's going to be growth in these stems that occurs in the meristems, and that's going to be the apical and the lateral meristem and at the nodes. And so here, these are the regions of stem growth is what we're going to call that meristem. Just remember that. It's going to have undifferentiated cells, so they haven't turned into whatever they're going to be yet. And you're going to have two different types of meristem. You can have, like we said, an apical meristem, which is going to be found at the tip of the stem. Division of cells are going to cause the stem to increase in length, so that's going to grow taller or longer. The lateral meristem is going to consist of cells called the cambium, and the division of these cells is going to cause the stem to increase in width. And so it's going to grow in segments. And so when it grows in segments, we're going to have them produce these nodes here. And basically those nodes are going to look like little lumps of tissue. And these are going to be places where things like leaves and flowers and cones and additional stems and branches are going to grow out of. So you see where the nodes are. Right, so there's going to be variations in stem structure. And so looking at these different variations, we see a potato, and it's going to have a nice ball there. That's going to consist mainly of things such as sugars or starches. Looking at the daffodil, that's going to have what we know as a bulb. Looking at the asparagus, actually what comes above the ground is going to be the stem. And then looking over at the strawberry, you see one that's going to go along the ground, and that's going to be a type of stem. So next we go to the leaves. The leaves are going to be what's important in feeding the plant. And so those leaves, the job is to produce food. So it goes through photosynthesis. So it converts potential energy from the sun into usable chemical energy, which is going to be the sugars, C6H12O6. Remember that chemical formula. So plants don't need to move around to get energy. Basically, the energy is going to come to them. I actually want to come back and talk about the stem variations really quick with the potato. Like I said, that's going to be kind of like just a big ball of starch. That type of stem is going to be referred to as a tuber. It's going to have swollen regions underground of those stems. That's going to store that nutrients. Looking over to the side, we're going to see things such as the daffodil here. And it's going to consist of a bulb. Next, coming over, and we can see the larger ones coming up. We're going to have the tendril type. And then if you look at the strawberry, that type, see, is going to be kind of like the stolons. That's what those are referred to, stolons. They're also going to be known as things like runners that grow along the soil surface. You can also have things like thorns that are going to be outgrowths that provide protection. Example, like honey locusts. You can have some that are going to be like the tendrils. They're going to support a plant by coiling around objects. They can also be modified leaves. So that's going to be things like grapevines and bean plants. You've got the fleshy stems. That's going to be larger, and they store large quantities of water, things like cacti. And then we have the rhizomes, which are going to be underground stems that produce roots and a new shoot, things like irises and ginger. Now moving on to the leaf, we notice that they have a layered structure here, and we see 5 layers. You're going to have that waxy cuticle, which is going to be found on the outer portion. You have the layer of non-photosynthetic cells. You have the photosynthetic cells underneath, so the epidermal or the non-photosynthetic. Then you see those palisade, which we'll talk about in a second, and the spongy mesophyll. Those are photosynthetic. Then you see the xylem and the phloem, and then the non-photosynthetic with the breathing holes, which are going to be called stomata. So looking at these, the leaf structure has, like we said, the different layers. The non-photosynthetic epidermal cells are going to form the upper surface of the leaf, and they secrete that waxy cuticle. It helps protect the leaf from damage and water loss. Once you get down to the 2 layers of photosynthetic cells, that's going to be the palisade mesophyll, which is going to be a column-shaped cell. They specialize for light absorption and contain large numbers of chloroplasts. Now, once you get to the spongy mesophyll, they're going to be irregular shaped cells, and they are specialized for gas exchange. They're going to contain fewer chloroplasts than the palisade cells, so they do still perform photosynthesis, just not as much. Then you get to the vascular tissue, which consists of xylem and phloem. It's responsible for transporting water, minerals, and sugar, like we've said before. You have your non-photosynthetic epidermal cells. They consist of the stomata, which are going to be pore-like openings through which the plant takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. There we go. There's going to be many variations in leaf structure. And so looking here, we can see the conifer leaves. They're going to be more needle-like. The monocot leaves are going to be more blade-like, and the eudicot leaves are going to be more branched. Now, looking in with the different leaves, we see some are going to have tendrils, and that's going to support the plant by coiling around objects, and they may also be modified stems, like with a pea plant. Sometimes looking at some of these leaves, they might have spines, which are going to be modified to protect the plant from predators, like the cacti. They might have bracts, which are going to be floral leaves to protect the developing flower, like in a poinsettia flower. They might be storage leaves, which are going to be fleshy leaves that store nutrients, like onion bulbs. They might be cotyledons, which are going to be embryonic tissue, and they might be insect trapping leaves that attract and capture and digest their prey, like the Venus flytrap. And so going into this, some of the largest leaves and some of the smallest leaves that we'll see, well, with the largest, we have what's known as the water lily. And so these leaves are going to be amongst the biggest. They measure up to 7 feet across each. And with some of the smallest, we'll have duckweed. And with these, you need at least 25 end to end just to measure an inch. So several structures are going to help plants resist water loss. With this, we're going to see these structures. They're going to have a waxy cuticle. They're going to have surface leaf hairs. And they're going to have holes called the stomata, which we've been talking about, to help resist this water loss. So looking here, first with the cuticle, we see that waxy water-repelling substance is going to keep water inside the leaf from diffusing through the leaves and evaporating. You see the leaf hairs. They're going to reflect sunlight and reduce speed of which breezes blow over them. That way it keeps from losing a lot of water. It helps decrease that water loss through that evaporation. And then, of course, you see the stomata. It's going to contain those guard cells, which are specialized epidermal cells. They create the opening for gas exchange during photosynthesis, and they close when water loss might be high due to evaporation. Remember, it could be high if it's going to be windy, or if it's hot, or if it's very dry air. Those are some conditions in which this would happen. Okay. So now we're going on to plant nutrition. Plants are going to obtain sunlight and usable elements from the environment. So what are the elements for plant nutrition? Well, plants are going to require 4 things for proper nutrition. They need sunlight for energy to build molecules of sugar. They're going to need water. They're going to need air as a source of carbon dioxide. And they're usually going to need soil. Now, we found out that we don't actually need soil that much now because we have some hydroponic ways to grow it. And so with that, if it does use soil, it's going to contain the minerals that are going to be essential for building the new cells and assembling them into new tissue. There's 13 different minerals that are required for proper survival and growth. 6 minerals are going to be essential and required in large amounts. These are going to be things like nitrogen, which helps make proteins and DNA. You need phosphorus in a plant with making ATP, DNA, and cell membranes. Magnesium helps to make the chlorophyll. Potassium helps making enzymes and controlling water balance. Sulfur will help make proteins and vitamins. And then calcium is going to be needed for several cell functions. Now, 7 minerals are going to be needed in small amounts. Those are going to be things like chlorine, iron, boron, manganese, zinc, copper, and molybdenum. So if you try to grow plants without soil, you would grow them hydroponically. And then you're just going to simply add these nutrients to the water and they would grow in water. And that's what you see in this picture. So like we said, there were 13 distinct minerals that help those plants grow, and then we have the 6 essential nutrients that we talked about. So looking at these essential components, we talked about sunlight providing energy. Water is going to help with reaction within the plant. Air, we need a source of carbon dioxide that we can take the carbon from and the oxygen and create sugar. And then the soil, where it's going to get its nutrients. So with your take-home or review, plant growth is going to be dependent on these 4 factors. So nutrient cycle for soil to organisms and back again, we are going to have 4 distinct components. We're going to need minerals, organic material, air, and water. So looking here, you see about 50% of what we need is going to be minerals. And you see water is going to be 45 to 50%. And then we have a small amount, 1 to 5%, being organic materials. Okay, so let's go on talk. Oops, sorry. Get it to move. There we go. Go on talking about minerals. Minerals are going to be half the total volume of the dirt of the organic material. They are inorganic. They're going to come from things like weathering rock or the breakdown of rock, and they're going to be grouped into 3 different sizes. So we'll have sand, we're going to have silt, and we're going to have clay. With those, the best soil have about an equal amount of each type. It influences the pH of the soil and can affect how well plants grow. They're showing you these hydrangeas here because if you change the pH around, you can create really blue hydrangeas or you can create really pink hydrangeas. I think if you add lye, which is going to be very basic, it will turn them blue. If you want them purple, you mix lye with something that's acidic like coffee grounds and you get the purple. And if you want really pink ones, then you're going to add acid, and I think that's the one that's going to create the really bright pinks, and that you can do with coffee grounds. And so, like we said, this one's going to make up about 50% of the total volume of soil. Now, with the organic matter, this is going to be carbon-containing matter. Remember, anything that's organic does contain carbon. So that's going to be from the decomposition of dead animal and plant material, like we would like to refer to it as humus, and this is going to return nutrients back to the soil as things die and decay. It's going to absorb and release water very easily, and when it does this, it releases a lot of nutrients. It's going to be performed by things like bacteria, fungus, insects, and earthworms that are going to help break it down. It's going to make up, like we said, about 1 to 5% of the total volume of soil. And then, with composting, this is also going to help with that decomposition of organic matter. It's still going to use some of the same insects and same worms and things like that. Next, we have water and air. It's going to fill the space between the particles of inorganic and organic matter, and it accounts for about 45 to 50% of the volume of soil. So plants are going to acquire essential nitrogen with the help of bacteria. Nitrogen is going to be a gas that's very abundant in the air. It's going to be about 73% of our air. And it has to be converted over into a nitrate or ammonium in the soil by bacteria in order for the plants to be able to use it. And so that process is going to be called nitrogen fixation. So it's going to be, like we said, one of the most common elements that we find in the atmosphere. It's actually used in plant growth for building things like proteins, DNA, and chlorophyll. So plants can't access this nitrogen directly from the atmosphere, so it's going to have to be able to take it in through the roots. It's going to have to be able to absorb it. So how is it going to do this? Well, it uses this nitrogen fixation process. And so basically what happens is a process in which it's going to bond between paired nitrogen atoms in molecules of N2. And they're going to be found and broken down into individual atoms and converted into a usable form. And so this is going to help with a mutualistic relationship between nitrogen-fixing bacteria and the plant. And it's going to occur in these 5 steps. So the first thing, the plant's going to secrete bacteria-attracting compounds from its roots. The bacteria are then going to enter the roots and move to the inner cells, multiplying and forming a nodule. Plants then deliver sugar to that nodule, which is going to serve as a fuel, and so it's going to feed the bacteria, and that enables them to then split the nitrogen molecules. The bacteria produce and release molecules with usable nitrogen to the plant, and then that plant is then going to distribute and absorb nitrogen throughout the plant body in order to help it grow. Now, some plants are going to have alternative ways for obtaining nitrogen. And so some plants are going to be able to harvest nitrogen through things like insects, And here we see the Venus flytrap that's able to do that. And we refer to those as carnivorous or insectivorous plants. Another way to make sure that we keep soil rich is to do a crop rotation. So with a crop rotation, this is where we're going to, farmers are going to plant crops that have nitrogen-fixing bacteria, things like alfalfa, in rotation with those that do not. And that way they won't deplete all the nitrogen from that soil and make it so other things can't grow there. So plants are going to transport water, sugar, and minerals through vascular tissue. So how do plants take up water and minerals? So water is going to be transported into the root by osmosis. Remember, osmosis is going to be a specialized form of diffusion where only water comes across into the system. So mineral uptake is going to differ from water uptake. Minerals are going to be chemically charged. Therefore, active or facilitated mineral transport into the plant has to be aided by transport proteins. So we see these proteins here that are going to help bring them across. Plants, again, are going to benefit from mutualistic relationships. And so we have things like fungi that are going to live around and within the plants and the roots that are going to help increase absorption and surface area. In exchange, they provide an increase in vitamins and minerals to the plant, and the fungus receives the sugars that it makes from photosynthesis. It also will receive some vitamins and some amino acids. So water and minerals are going to be distributed through the xylem, and so evaporation is going to be relentless. So in order for that water to come up from the ground, it's going to use, remember, cohesion and adhesion, where those water molecules are going to stick together as they stick to the sides of the vessels and travel up through the tree. So the xylem is going to be responsible for directing the flow of water and dissolved minerals from roots to plant cells. So we're going to have three important components by which water is going to be moved through the plant. We're going to use evaporation. Let's move on to here. And so with the evaporation, low water concentrations in the air relative to the leaf are going to help move that up. Remember we said cohesion and adhesion, and it helps with capillary action and sticking to those sides and moves it up. It goes from the roots all the way to those stomata in the leaves. Next, we're going to have tension. So as water molecules evaporate, it's going to create a tension, and it's going to pull it up through other water molecules that are going to be stuck to it. And it occurs as a result because of those hydrogen bonds between water molecules. And then cohesion is going to be referring to the stickiness of water. As one water molecule evaporates and pulls up the molecule next to it, the molecule then pulls up the next molecule next to it, and so on. So then you end up with a cohesion tension mechanism. And basically that's going to be defined as a force driving fluid flow in the xylem. It's going to result from the evaporation of water from leaves, which pulls water up from the roots. Plants do not need to expend any energy to pump water and minerals up from the roots to the leaves. But it's not always perfect. There will be some drawbacks. So with this system of water transport, there is going to be limits. For example, we have size in which a tree can effectively grow. It can't grow but so big because of this. Here we have a xylem, which is going to store sugars to nourish the new leaf buds. So with the storage and transport of sap, here we're going to have sap, which is a fluid consisting of water, minerals, sugar, and nutrients. So as photosynthesis ceases, sugar can be moved from the phloem to the roots for storage. When the new structure bud is starting to bud off in the spring, starch from the roots is then going to be broken down and then transported in the xylem to parts of the plant so it can actually start to bud. And so you see those little leaf buds coming out in the spring, and that's where they're getting their food from. They go dormant during the winter, the food's stored in the roots, and then during the summer, or not summer but spring, it is broken down and put back into the fluids brought up through the tree from the xylem, and it's able to feed those leaf buds. Humans are going to be able to use sap for specific things. Here we have a maple syrup being harvested from a tree. So basically they drill into the xylem of a sugar maple tree and they insert a small tube and they're able to collect that maple syrup. So sugar and other nutrients are going to be distributed through the phloem. So phloem is basically going to be the food delivery system. Sugar is going to be produced at the leaves, that's the source, and then it's going to be transported to places. Sinks is what they're referred to, where sugar is needed. So source is where it's created. The sinks are going to be where it's needed. And so basically, with the phloem, it's going to be a pipeline that's moving the sugar that was produced in the leaves to places like the roots, the stems, the buds, the flowers, and the fruits. And this process is going to be known as the pressure flow mechanism. So you're going to have 5 steps to phloem use. It uses to move sugar. And so the first step, the sugar is going to be loaded by active transport into phloem from sites of production, which is going to be the leaves. Increased sugar concentration in phloem is going to be immediately causes the water to move from the xylem to the phloem by osmosis. As water moves into the phloem, the fluid pressure inside phloem is going to increase. Increases in phloem pressure is going to cause the fluid to move elsewhere throughout the plant. And then as the sugar is going to be pushed through the plant body, it's going to be moved out of the phloem by active transport to various locations where it's needed. Now looking here, you're going to see that this little guy here, he's going to be an aphid. He's able to pierce the plant stem to gain access to sugary phloem. Now he can take this and use like a high pressure system, and as he consumes it, it's going to be forced through his digestive system, and it comes through at such pressure it actually is going to come out of his anus here. And so that's what you see, and that's what the ants are going to consume, is going to be that fluid. And that's going to end us for Unit 3. See you back here for Unit 4.